Good morning and welcome to our webinar series on how to seamlessly integrate CasaTunes with multi-zone AV receivers. We need to first begin by defining what we mean by integrating with multi-zone AV receivers. In our case, what we want to do is we want to use the AV receiver essentially as a power amplifier for a room. So this allows you to play your music from CasaTunes into that room using the AV receiver as the power amplifier. Now, if you have an AV receiver that supports multiple zones, then you can use the AV receiver to power multiple rooms. Now you can listen to all of your CasaTunes music and all the AirPlay streams in any of these AV receiver-powered rooms. And we provide extensive support for popular AV receivers, including those from Denon, Harman, Marantz, Onkyo, Pioneer, Sony, and Yamaha. When you get the CasaTunes software, it actually provides out-of-the-box support for all these different receivers, and it actually provides out-of-the-box support for 2 of each kind of receivers, and these can easily be augmented by creating custom control module files, which we'll talk about later. So when would you use this capability? There are really 2 common scenarios. The first is when you are trying to integrate an existing AV receiver with the whole house music system. So this would typically be a living room or a master bedroom or any other room that would have an AV receiver where you also want to listen to music, to whole house music. And the second scenario is where you want to provide a low-cost multi-room music solution for a customer. This is very complementary for the CT3, which has a 3 hardwired room support. So you can use the hardwired rooms with your AV receiver or multi-zone AV receiver, and then you can use wireless speakers or network speakers through our AirPlay capability to provide music in the additional rooms. But there are some other outside-of-the-box type examples. So as you probably picked up by now, there are quite a few AV receivers today that still do not offer AirPlay support, or they offer a single stream of AirPlay. So in the case of a multi-zone AV receiver, you couldn't listen to 2 different AirPlay streams in each room. Well, with CasaTunes, you now can AirPlay enable those receivers that don't have AirPlay, and you can have an independent AirPlay stream in each of the powered rooms through the AV receiver. Another fun idea is to add a CasaTunes keypad to control your AV receiver. This makes it much easier for the homeowner to start listening to music. They don't have to go grab the remotes. They can just go ahead and use the keypad to start listening to the music in their living room. And then CasaTunes provides a lot of advanced capabilities, such as waking up and sleeping to music, which are typically not available on an AV receiver. So let's look at how we can physically connect, in this case, a CasaTunes CT3, which is our 3-room system, with a Denon AVR 2313, which is a 2-zone system. So there's 2 things that you need to configure from a physical perspective. First of all, we need to set up the control, and CasaTunes can control the AV receiver either through IP or through RS-232 or serial. So in the case of IP, you simply need to connect the AV receiver to your network, and you need to connect your CasaTunes CT3 to your network. There's no additional wiring between the 2 systems. In the case of using a serial port or an RS-232 connection, we will actually connect a serial cable from the CT3 to your AV receiver serial in over here. So that takes care of the control side. On the speaker side, or on the audio side, what we need to do is we need to feed the preamp out of the CT3 into a source on the AV receiver. Now this source is actually configured for you in Casa Setup, which is our setup utility, and we'll look at that in a second. But basically it will tell you that this zone needs to be connected to the CD input on this AV receiver, and the second zone needs to be connected to the DVD input on the AV receiver. And of course, in this two-zone scenario, we would have hooked up our speakers to the main living room. We have a 5.1 scenario there. And then we would have our kitchen hooked up to the surround backs, which will be zone 2. So that took care of the physical connectivity. Now we need to configure the CasaTunes software to let it know that we are going to be playing music in the living room through an AV receiver and in the kitchen through an AV receiver. So to do this, we start up the CasaTunes setup utility called Casa Setup. We select the Rooms tabs. This is the Rooms tabs up here. It displays a list of all the rooms available in this system. In this case, we're configuring the living room, so we select the living room, and it will populate all the living room information on the right-hand side here. And now we're going to, first of all, we're going to enable the fixed volume output. What this does is it tells CasaTunes to always play the music out of the CasaTunes system with a fixed volume. And we are then going to use the volume control on the AV receiver to control the volume level going up and down. Now, the fixed volume level here allows you to specify what that volume level should be, and you should calibrate this so that when you move from different sources on your AV receiver, the volume remains the same as you switch between those sources. The next thing that we need to do is we need to actually tell the CasaTunes that we are going to enable an AV receiver for this particular zone. And once we check this box, it will give us these different options. This pull down here allows us to select from the list of available receivers. Now, as I mentioned before, out of the box you get two. It supports 2 receivers. So there's a Denon 1 and a Denon 2 in the case of the receivers. And then there's a Denon 1 and Denon 2 for either using IP or using serial. So in this case, we're using the IP connection, and we're just using the first receiver. And we also select the main room. So there'll be an option here for Denon 1 main room, Denon 1 zone 2, Denon 1 zone 3, Denon 1 zone 4. For the kitchen, we would select Denon 1 Zone 2. The only additional setting that you have to set once you select the Denon 1 using the IP control is to specify its IP address. So this is the IP address of the Denon AVR receiver itself. And lastly, note down here that it tells us that we need to connect the output, the preamp output of living room, to the CD input for the main room. Once you've done the physical connection and then the software setup, now the system is ready to be used. And the only purpose of this slide is to show you that there is no difference controlling a room that is set up to use AVR to power that room versus using a multi-channel amp. The UI is completely the same, so there's nothing the homeowner has to know differently between the two different connections. So we do have a set of best practices that we recommend you follow. Obviously the first one is to make sure that your AV receiver is enabled for network standby. So these AV receivers, when they go into standby mode, unless you enable this option on some of the model numbers, you won't be able to wake it up. You won't be able to send it an IP command to wake it up out of the standby mode. So you need to make sure that it's enabled for network standby. The next one is the IP address that's allocated to the AV receiver should ideally be a static IP address. This means that no matter if your AV receiver gets turned off or your router gets turned off or whatever is allocating the IP addresses gets turned off, the next time that system's turned back on again, the AV receiver will have the same IP address. Because if the AV receiver comes up and is allocated a different IP address than is configured in CasaTunes, CasaTunes will not be able to control that AV receiver. The best way to set up a static IP address is to configure your router to make a reservation, an IP reservation. And it's beyond the scope of this webinar, but that's something you can Google and find out how to do for your particular router model. Just about every router now supports that capability. The third point is, as we discussed previously, is to make sure that you enable the fixed volume output for the zone, and that you normalize the volume so that it matches the other sources. So as you switch between sources on the AV receiver, you don't want to have a lot of volume level shifting going on. So you can do this by setting the volume level on the fixed volume output. Now, one thing about our implementation is that we actually use one-way drivers. So, that one-way driver actually sends commands to your AV receiver. So we don't know, for example, what's the current value on that, the current value of the volume, for example, on that AV receiver, unless we just set it. So what we recommend is that you do select the option to reset the volume on power, which will cause CasaTunes to send out the volume command when that room is powered up. That way we know the volume level that was just sent out, and you can protect your customers against loud volumes if that room was, if the AV receiver had previously been turned on in that room and it was very loud when they last turned it off. And then lastly, if your CasaTunes system is not co-located near your AV receiver, then you may need to use audio bail-ins if the distance between them is greater than a certain amount. So in summary, this just builds on the unique flexibility that CasaTunes brings to the table. So we're probably the only solution that supports being able to play music back through wired, network, wireless, and now AVR connected speakers, and all with out-of-the-box support. So this capability provides out-of-the-box integration of the home theater in the living room with the whole house music system. And the best part is that it's truly seamless. It also provides a low-cost multi-room music solutions when you combine this with our CasaTunes AirPlay speaker bundles. And the out-of-the-box support will handle probably 99% of the installs out there. But as we've said before, and there are tech notes on this, you can actually create custom control modules for pretty much any device as long as it can be controlled either by IP, serial, UDP, or using a REST interface. And the best part is that it's seamless to the homeowner. So the homeowner is not having to learn two different ways of doing something. And they get all the same capabilities regardless of whether the room is wired through a multi-channel amp, through a wireless speaker, or through an AVR connected speaker. And that brings us to the conclusion of this webinar series. I want to thank you for your attendance, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.